Hello and good evening. Welcome back to Wednesday Night Live from Courtroom Confidential, the fastest growing true crime news channel on YouTube. If you don't believe me, I will arm wrestle you over it. We've got a lot of fun and interesting things happening tonight. The first thing right off the bat to share with you guys is that Joel Waldman from Surviving the Survivor is going to join us in just a little bit. He's actually wrapping up a live of his own that some of you may have been watching. And as soon as he's done with that, he's going to hop on with us to talk about the Ellen Greenberg case. We had asked you guys cases that you're interested in, updates that you want to hear more about. And that is a case that came up time and time again. And I'm willing to admit when I am not a full-fledged expert on something, which is usually most of the time, but especially on this case, I know the rough outline of the case and why it is creating so much intrigue and questions with people, and rightfully so. But Joel has really gone deep on this case and knows a lot. And so I'm hoping he'll share some of that information with us. So depending on how much time we have, we're going to do another poll because we might not be able to get to everything. And I don't want to choose. I'd rather you guys choose. So the cases that we have for consideration are also Kouri Richins had a bail hearing and some change and some other stuff involved. If you want to hear about that, Brian Kohberger had a hearing about whether or not the death penalty will be a part of his case, obviously of great magnitude. And then Karen Reed had an evidentiary hearing today, actually. I was watching some of that and listening to those arguments, and so we could chat about that too. But first, before all of that, I know that everyone had been following very closely the Richard Allen trial out of Delphi. There was obviously a verdict, and we will talk a little bit about that verdict, kind of just give you my gut reaction to it, why I feel, more importantly, it's one of those cases that seems to have really created some strong feelings from people on both sides of that issue. And then stay tuned to the very end because we do have an announcement about our Courtroom Confidential conversation series that we're getting a lot of really positive feedback. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying doing it. So it makes me feel so good that you guys are enjoying watching that. We'll tell you who our next guest will be. Please hit those like buttons. I feel obliged to go ahead and remind everyone of that. And to do some special thanks to everybody who gave gifts last week that I missed out on. Mallory Beavers, thank you so much. And Graciela Gracie G, I saw you in the chat earlier, so thank you so much for being so kind to give a gift last week. And we have some new members. She Jukester, Denise News Junkie, Annalie Finch, Jury Duty Pod, Kimberly B, and Suzanne. And I think Suzanne was actually today. So welcome all those new members. Membership is open. If you want to learn more about it, go ahead and click join from my laptop, not from your phone, as I always have to remind myself, even because I don't know why it's difficult to do it on your phone, or nearly impossible, so I'm told. Hello to everybody on Nancy, Meg P, Disney Nerd 85, Ash MJ. I see all of you in the chat. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to join us and talk a little bit about true crime and the updates in some of these cases. So let's jump right in. First, Richard Allen. Strong feelings from a lot of people on both sides of this. Some people that I'm very close to, and some people I'm fans of, have very strong feelings about this case, and I think rightfully so. I think that one thing everybody agrees on, regardless about putting aside guilt or innocence, guilty or not guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt or not, was that the conditions in which Richard Allen was held created, at the very least, problems, questions, concerns, and perhaps at the most was unjust. And I think that's where a lot of people are starting to get upset about this case, because they feel like the way in which this man was held and the depths in which his mental decline went may have caused those confessions. One thing I'll just throw out there is the idea that while that can be true, it is not necessarily mutually exclusive that just because he was subjected to that mistreatment, if that's what you want to call it, and I'll call it that for the purposes of this discussion, that does not mean that he also could not have been responsible for these horrible, horrible murders. In other words, one doesn't necessarily rule out the other, that he both could have been subjected to horrible conditions. JC Broadway says it makes her, or pardon me, JC, hard to trust the system in every way on that case. I agree, and I think justified in feeling that way. And so that's why I'm saying at the same time that this person could be mistrusted, and at the same time that you can mistrust the system, and at the same time that you could have problems with the judge, he also could have been guilty of a really, really horrible crime, which the jury did find him responsible for. This is where I'm coming from. I have spent all of my career and the majority of my breathing days involved in this system of criminal justice. And I want to believe that it is doing the right thing at the end of the day. And I want to believe that it's still a system that we can trust and believe in. And I am bothered greatly when there are cases like this that make people question that. And I'm not even saying that the people are wrong for questioning it. I'm saying you're right in questioning it. It's the system that messed up, because here we have a case of incredible magnitude where we all should be rooting for justice. And instead, now we're left in this position where I'm reading your comments and a lot of you feel like very bothered by that verdict. The other thing I will say about this is that 60 confessions is hard to get around. That is an uphill battle, no matter what your argument, no matter what defense you put on, no matter how cruel his conditions were. 60 confessions is a lot. And a lot of these, not all, I can already hear you all, but a lot of these were without equivocation. A lot of these were confessions of, I did this. Not mincing words, not vague, not kind of maybe perhaps assuming responsibility, but confessions that I would consider a confession if I were putting on this case. But I think the biggest problem, and I'm saying that the conditions in which he was held are a huge problem. But the biggest problem to me with this case was the way in which it was handled by the judge as far as transparency goes. I don't want to get into questioning the judge's decisions. I know a lot of people have a problem with the idea that certain evidence was kept out. Every single case is going to be like that. Judge is going to have to make difficult decisions, and it's going to please some and anger others. But the decisions to lock this trial down and close off any kind of transparency, to me, is not only inexplicable, but to some extent the cause of all of this controversy. Because the light of day was not shed on this case, because we didn't have cameras inside the courtroom, because we didn't even have the bare minimum of reporters with modern day electric devices that they can be telling us what was happening in a trustworthy manner inside of that courtroom, we're all starting to question it. And we're all starting to go, I don't really know what took place. I don't know what can be believed. And when a judge continues to shut doors and continues to foreclose the ability for the outside world to look in at how justice is being made, you're going to invite people to be skeptical, and you're going to invite people to go beyond skeptical and to start to question the entire system. And if we arrive at that to me is a real tragedy. So, I mean, in this case, there's still a gag order in place, which is amazing to me that we're after the conviction, all of the concerns that the judge may have had. And believe me, again, I'm not saying that the concerns about protecting the integrity of this case were unfounded. Every case should have its integrity protected. You're dealing with a very small community with a tremendous amount of public interest and media attention. I understand a judge saying, let's take a breath. I'm not just going to open the doors wide of this courtroom and allow everybody to come inside and perhaps mess this whole thing up. I understand that, and I appreciate that. But you had no cameras inside the courtroom, no electronic devices for the reporters, this bizarre lottery system for the reporters. They weren't even guaranteed seats. You had bizarre acoustics, and we know this because we've spoken to reporters who were inside that courtroom. Bizarre acoustics that they couldn't even properly hear what was being said. So it's like, it's one thing that you're not going to let us record it. It's another thing that you're not going to let us type it down. And it's a third thing that we can't even get a really good audience of what's taking place. The gag order placed upon the parties involved, the jury sequestered, and I'm not talking sequestered, I'm talking sequestered in all caps, where they're living an hour away from their homes, put up inside of a hotel, no contact with the outside world through electronics themselves, monitored television, monitored visits with their loved ones. I mean, what are we doing here when you start to treat the jurors like such children? I just, again, think that you are inviting more trouble than you're avoiding with all of your concern. And that's, I think, where I really arrive at. And so when I hear people say, I'm so bothered by this case, I am very troubled with the way that this all ended up. I get it. I understand it. I appreciate it. I feel much the same way too, because at the end of the day, I would like to believe that the right thing was done. But I don't quite know how this trial played out. And will we ever quite know, so that we can kind of judge for ourselves how this all played out? Let's go ahead and start some of the questions, because otherwise I'm just going to continue to just rant here. Sorry, I missed that last one, Kaylin. Lisa H4 says, do you also think the secrecy of the case played a role in all of this too? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that I've seen this in high profile cases before, where everybody starts to act differently than they should. Judge starts to behave differently, prosecutor, defense attorneys, everyone starts to behave differently when you've got cameras inside the courtroom. But this was almost the reverse. It was the incredible amount of attention caused the judge to treat this like, I imagine this judge has never enforced these kinds of rules in the past. If I'm wrong, let me know. But when you start enforcing these kinds of rules to the point that we don't feel like we can quite know what's going on, which then leads to us feeling like we can't quite trust what's going on, that's a major problem. And there's where I think the failure took place, because I think you could have protected the integrity of this case and not sacrificed the public perception of the justice system at the same time. CJ says, what's next for him? His sentencing is coming up. My understanding is he's looking at over 100 years in prison. That sentencing will probably, as far as the decision-making that the judge has to do, I don't know how much of that is outside of her hands or not. But as in any sentencing hearing, we could hear from family members. We could hear from the victim's family, their parents. We could hear from the family members of the defendant, of Richard Allen, who may be allowed to speak. And because all of this changes now, it's all about kind of a much more touchy-feely experience as far as what are we going to do with this person now that we've found them responsible for these horrible, horrible crimes. And yes, even Richard Allen may be given an opportunity, if he wants it, to speak himself, which would be pretty incredible stuff. So this might be a sentencing hearing worth, I would say, tuning in for. But again, we're going to have to hear it from handwritten notes from people who are sitting on the inside. Alicia K. Mayer says, do you think the trial transcripts will ever be released? I think that after a FOIA request, I think that after some of these reporters start making requests through the government, normal channels that will start getting this stuff. But again, is that enough? Is that enough to really give us that experience? Ashley, thank you so much for becoming a member. Is that enough to give us a true understanding of how this played out? I'll tell you this for sure. Reading from a transcript does not help you to really appreciate how things played out in court, and we've missed that. That we will never have. My understanding is it wasn't even recorded in any kind of way. I know it wasn't broadcast, but my understanding it wasn't even recorded in any kind of way. Samantha Valentine says, do you think he may have good appeal issues? That's a great question. First of all, he's going to appeal. Absolutely, 100%. This case will be appealed. As are nearly every murder trial. And it always comes down to not, how do I explain this? Appeal is a very specific question. It asks, given the four corners of what took place in court, were the decisions made by the judge that somehow went beyond abuse of discretion? That is usually the biggest question to be asked for an appellate court to even hear an appeal. Did something happen that I can see in the transcripts, in the four corners? In other words, not something that took place outside of court. Not, usually this is why other evidence doesn't become, discovered evidence after the fact doesn't become an issue for an appeal. What took place during that trial that is recorded on the transcripts that a judge sitting in review of Judge Gull can say, you went beyond your discretion. This was an abuse of your discretion in making this decision. And I think the biggest issues will come down to third-party culpability arguments. The two composite sketches that were made of based on eyewitnesses of the alleged suspect were not presented in court. Why not? Why not give the defense? That's, to me, an absolutely reasonable thing to argue in court. You were looking for somebody. This is who you were looking for. And that doesn't look like our guy. Isn't that something that should have been, to me, a reasonable thing to ask for in court? Now, when it comes to third-party culpability, lots of times judges enjoy wide discretion because they are tasked with not turning the case into a circus. So in other words, we don't have an interest in trials just being defense attorneys throwing every red herring that they can in front of a jury to the point of confusing them. And so a lot of times there is a fairly high hurdle that needs to be crossed by the defense to say why we need this in. But this was evidence created by the investigation, by the prosecution team. And that Odinism issue, I don't know how else to phrase it, but this idea that there was perhaps, according to the defense, some sort of cult involvement. And I will say, I agree with the judge in keeping that out. I think that was the right decision because I think that could have sent this entire trial on a very, much different out in space kind of side quest. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was right to do so. They had evidence that could have perhaps supported that theory. In fact, the investigators themselves looked into that at a certain point. And I think that the judge just felt, you know what? If I peel back this part of the wallpaper, the whole thing's coming off and it's going to turn this whole trial into an absolute mess. And she shut it down. But I think those will become the basis for an appeal for sure. I'd be shocked if those weren't issues 1 and 2. Grandma of 3 says, have any members of the jury talked publicly? I was torn throughout it, and I'm curious about their comments. My understanding is no, and we probably won't hear from them because I think they fall under that gag order too. So this gag order is in effect until sentencing, which is just bizarre to me. I started to say this, but the gag order is to protect the integrity of the trial. The trial took place. The trial ended. the second that jury gave a verdict, and that verdict was read in open court, and it's part of the record. So the reason why we're still experiencing this gag order, in my view, serves no other purpose but to frustrate all of us trying to get a little bit more clarity about what took place during that trial. But to save me from rambling further, I see waiting in the wings is our savior. Please, everybody, welcome Joel Waldman, YouTube host extraordinaire of Surviving the Survivor, and my good friend. How are you doing, my friend?
Very well, although slightly depressed because we just wrapped the show. The 2-year mark since the brutal quadruple murders at the University of Idaho. We just had 2 people on who live in Moscow. The other one lives in Pullman, which is where the accused killer, we're not saying his name tonight, where the accused killer was studying, but it was a really heavy show. We were looking at a lot of photos and listening of the victims and listening to the victims' parents speak out. And if anyone ever, if he is in fact convicted of these crimes, I don't know of a person that would deserve the death penalty more than he would. So they've got a firing squad in Idaho. Anyway, I didn't mean to bring you guys all down.
No,
I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, the air just got taken.
I want a shirt though immediately. I immediately want a shirt. You better send me one.
Coming your way. No, I watched some of that live that you were doing before we started, and you're right. It is very heavy, but by heavy, I don't mean to say not incredibly worth watching as well. Very fascinating to hear these people and the effect that it's had on their community. Well, to cheer you up, I thought we could talk about the Ellen Greenberg case because that's a real sunny topic. But I was telling people before you got on that this is a case that a lot of people have been fascinated with. We asked some of our subscribers what case do they want to hear about more, and this came up number one because people are very troubled by this case. I think the reason for that is immediately obvious once you hear just the bare minimum amount of facts on it. But I did some research in preparation for this today, and there's some things that I didn't even fully appreciate and understand. And I'm hoping that you can kind of fill us in on it. But the first of which is this took place 14 years ago. We're talking about a incident, and I'll characterize it that way, that took place in January of 2011. And these people, meaning her family, is still trying to fight for what they feel is, by the way, just to get law enforcement to characterize this in a way that they feel is appropriate, right? We're not even at the point where we have a suspect list. We're just at the point where we want to recharacterize this. But before I stomp all over your introduction to it, tell us a little bit about it.
This is the one case that perplexes me beyond any other, and is becoming kind of like a labor of love to try to help get justice. And I can only try to help. Other people are working on it as well. But it's like you said, this happened back in 2011. I'm not going to be as couth as you, Josh Ritter. This is 100% a cover-up. Philadelphia is notoriously corrupt. I have no doubt in my mind about this. I have a thumbnail for tomorrow. It's always shady in Philadelphia, and I'm just really aggravated by what's going on. But yeah, just to kind of set the stage, it was 2011. It was a super snowy night. It was a nor'easter. It wasn't like it was just coming down a couple of inches. It was coming down a couple of feet. January 26th. Ellen Greenberg's an elementary school teacher. She's living with her fiance, Sam Goldberg. She stopped on the way home to get gasoline. She was in the process of making a fruit salad, 2 things you wouldn't do if you're planning to unalive yourself. She is then discovered stabbed 20 times by her fiance, who calls his powerful judge uncle in Philadelphia first, or the cousin first. Eventually the cousin and the uncle make their way to the apartment where they're living in a real trendy spot of Philadelphia known as Manayunk. Oh, by the way, on the 911 call, he somehow doesn't manage to see a knife embedded 5 inches deep into her chest. And when you listen to the 911 call, look, you don't have to be a psychologist to understand, I think, what's going on. And it's just an unbelievable miscarriage of justice. And I'm really hoping that now things turn around. Tomorrow night,
So
yeah, real quick. Tomorrow night on our show, we've got Ellen's parents, along with the former Philly homicide prosecutor. He's the only guy that I know that's really looked at the case files, and I can definitely connect you, Josh, with him. And then the private investigator, Tom Brennan, and the family. The father was an orthodontist, Josh, and Sandy, I'm not sure if she worked, but they've spent $800,000 at this point of their own money in this case, has never been investigated. And the reason it's back in the news this week, the Chester County DA, who it's been kicked to by the Philly corrupt prosecutor and the now governor of Pennsylvania, it's been kicked there. And this week they came out and said, look, we're putting it on inactive. It remains on inactive status. So it felt like a huge blow. Some people are reading it otherwise. I can explain that in a minute, but I'll stop talking.
what time tomorrow are you doing that show? Because that'll be fascinating.
Yeah, it's 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 Pacific, and I don't know what time in Australia.
Okay. I'm going to show you guys a graphic so that if you're not familiar with this case, I probably only need to show you this image and tell you that this has been classified as a suicide for you to get why Joel is as worked up as he is about this. And even though this is a graphic, not a photograph, I'm going to warn you, it is graphic. Here we go. So that right there, this was created by her family's attorneys, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And one of the things no one ever talks about, by the way, is that gash on her head. It's like a 4-inch gash. So where does that come from? There's so many other details that don't add up, but didn't mean to cut you off there, Josh.
No, because I want to get into that because you know about this, but just at first glance, the theory, the working theory for very long had been that she had stabbed herself in all the locations that you're seeing with these knife marks here in an attempt to kill herself. And it's just, knowing nothing beyond that, you start to go, what are you talking about? That how could you possibly arrive at that conclusion? But you talked a little bit about the other evidence suggesting that this was foul play. I want to talk about just a little bit of some of the evidence of why they believe it was a suicide, and my list is not long, so you don't have to sit tight for long. But one, the door was locked from the inside, right? According to the fiance, he had to break down the door to get inside to discover her body. So number one, and I'm just, playing devil's advocate or playing advocate of the police here.
Can I hop in there real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
on the door. So on the door lock, it's you've seen them in hotel rooms. It's a swing lock that swings open, and then and he claims, as you just said, that he broke in. Gavin Fish, who's done amazing reporting on this, he has his own YouTube channel. Gavin Fish, shout out to him. He actually tested it. It's physically impossible, number one, to stab yourself like this, but because I see Amy Crew in the chat, but it's also physically impossible to break down the door and leave that lock intact. I don't think there's any way. Some people say it's, there's a small percent chance, but it doesn't add up.
Okay. And that's fine, but that's at least one of the hooks in which they're hanging their hat, right? Is this idea that, attack that as you will, but the door they're saying was locked, at least according to the fiance. The logical kind of step being she was the only one inside and she had to have locked it herself if she was on the inside. And then the other piece of evidence, and I went through quite a bit today to try to find what it is that they're basing this on, because that's to me, one of the most frustrating things is if you're going to call this a suicide. By the way, in my career, I've seen suicides that are incredibly bizarre.
Mm.
And suicide by its nature is one of those things where people have a real problem accepting it. I've been hired in my private capacity to investigate situations where people have the police have believed that they've taken their own life, and the family members simply cannot accept it. So the idea that something would be questioned is not unheard of, and the idea that people would harm themselves in very bizarre manners also not unheard of. But you would think in a case with these circumstances that they would have a lot to present to the public as to why they're arriving at this conclusion. And so when I found the door locked from the inside, and then their second point that I was able to find was that there were no quote unquote defensive wounds on the fiance, meaning if you think he's responsible, then a person using a knife in this manner, you would expect to have some defensive wounds on him. And he did not, at least according to the reports I saw.
By the way,
that's it.
Yeah, and Josh Greenberg has refuted those claims. She was also found with bruising, and I'd have to look at my notes, but there were some other bodily harm that was done. So Josh said he believes she was trying to defend herself. A couple of really quick things before I forget him. She was or had been seeing a psychiatrist. She did say that she was depressed. She was taking some anxiety medication, which 90% of this country is probably taking. It didn't seem incredibly out of the ordinary. But one of the things that's been talked about is that she was not that happy in the relationship, and there's a possibility that she was going to break up or end the engagement. And we don't know, obviously, if that's what triggered this potentially, but I'm sure there was a feeling at the very least from this fiance that things were starting to go downhill for him. And it's just, again, it's infuriating. There's also a video of him in the building, just kind of pacing around. It does not look like a innocent person. That's my opinion. Obviously, it's got to be investigated. And another thing, real quick, Josh, is she was found propped up against a counter like this, but the blood on her face, there was 2 drips going this way. So it totally defies logic. If she's found propped to have blood, the blood should be running down her face. So it's another issue. This guy,
I don't need to be a medical examiner to understand how gravity works.
Yeah, and this guy, by the way, went on, got married, has some kids. He's a producer at a golf channel or something. He lives in Manhattan, last we heard. So his life's going on. But this story is starting to pick up a lot more steam. I know a few people who are working on some pretty big documentaries about it that we'll be able to kind of tell you more about down the road.
One thing I'm hoping you can help us understand too is kind of the history of how we arrived here today, because a death can be classified by a medical examiner in about 4 different ways. There's homicide. There's, I'm being told not to use the S word, but because we'll get flagged by YouTube. But there's the taking your own life scenario. There's accident, or there's natural causes. And there's also undetermined, which is a often overlooked, but I think very important classification, because sometimes it just cannot be determined given what the medical examiner is working with. And the medical examiner is working with mainly the body, perhaps some information about the surrounding circumstances, perhaps some understanding about the players involved, but mainly just dealing with the body. And so you would think in a case like this, where the physical evidence presents as immediately arriving at one determination, even if there was evidence not in support of that you would arrive at undetermined. But instead, in this case, they didn't. And the family member is Well, actually, initially they arrived at homicide, right?
Yeah, they
Then
went
it
through
was
3 phases.
changed,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Then it was changed to self-harm,
Mhm.
and now the family is basically just saying, even if you put it down as indeterminate, undetermined,
Yeah.
that's even a more helpful thing towards our cause, right?
Yeah, so it actually went through so it was initially, the next day was, classified as a homicide. Then it was changed to undetermined, and then there was a closed door meeting that was never on the record between prosecutors, police, and the medical examiner, which doesn't happen, and this doesn't happen, Josh. And after that meeting, it was, summarily switched to an unaliving. But Josh, I have a question for you. So someone, and I apologize, I can't remember who it was, but someone emailed me and shot me a message, I think on Twitter, saying, this person didn't understand why this case has never been investigated because according to this person, you can still investigate an unaliving. Is that true? Would police go and investigate that if there was, I don't know. I mean, if there's any possible doubt, I guess.
The answer is that the police are not they don't take orders from the medical examiner. In other words, that they can conduct their own investigation for as long as they feel that it's appropriate to get the answers that they feel like they need. The only people they really have to answer to are their own bosses. If their sergeant shuts it down, maybe then they stop. But just because the medical examiner comes out with undetermined or self-harm or something, that doesn't mean that they stop everything they're doing. I mean, we've seen that, in plenty of other cases that we've been talking about where, I mean, Karen Reed is something that comes to mind. The medical examiner in that case did not arrive at the conclusion that that was a homicide, yet that didn't stop the investigators and didn't stop the prosecutors from pursuing what they felt was the right thing. So, that's my long-winded answer to your question is they don't take orders from the medical examiner. The
Yeah,
medical examiner is just supposed to be a helpful guide for them.
right. And it appears that this medical examiner, who by the way is still working, but he's down here in South Florida, no surprise there. He was the ME on the Parkland shooting, the school shooting,
Oh, wow.
which is kind of an interesting, side note there. But just to give it a little more texture and perspective, because it gets worse from here. It's a good thing you're a defense attorney because maybe they'll come after me, Josh, and I'll have to. But I'm getting so annoyed. My mom's gonna flip out on me, Carm, and it's hilarious because you're being told not to use the S word. So you and I are actually basically married to the same woman, because I get the same thing. So the right after this, within I think 24 hours, the fiance, his name is Sam Goldberg. His uncle is a guy named James Schwartzman, and his son is a guy named Camion. So Camion and Sam are cousins. So he called Camion first. James Schwartzman at the time, I'm not sure what he's up to now. He was a pretty high-ranking judge in Philadelphia. And then you come to find out, this is convoluted, but I'm just going to throw it out there that Judge Schwartzman's daughter happened to go to the same high school at the same time with the now governor Josh Shapiro. So that's when you start to see, and this is where Gavin Fish has some really interesting reporting, and so does the Philadelphia
I
Inquirer.
need the
by the way.
chart. I need the
Yeah.
cork board with the push pins and the yarn to understand this.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's hard. By the way, I called Carm. I just did the Moscow story, and I'm obviously doing this with you. And then Court TV has asked me to come on tonight to talk Kouri Richins, and I'm telling Carm, I feel like I'm having memory issues, like I'm getting, God forbid, early onset dementia. He called me an idiot and told me that I'm a hysteric and I'm doing too much at once. But I still don't feel like I'm working hard, Josh Ritter, at all. And I think I'm really enjoying what I'm doing here, where I used to be forced into doing stuff in traditional news. But anyway, so there's this weird entanglement. And then the Philadelphia DA is a guy named Larry Krasner, who's also in that same circle. And in 2018, when they were looking to investigate this, Josh Shapiro was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and he basically kicked it away from himself, recused himself, saying it was a conflict, which maybe it was. But Philadelphia kicked it away, and they kicked it to Chester County, which is very affluent, nice, beautiful place outside suburban Philadelphia. And now they are putting it or keeping it on this inactive status. But
Yeah.
at the very end of their statement, and this is, and Josh, I'd like to get your take on this. It says, this is a statement put out by Chester County. There is no statute of limitations for criminal homicide in Pennsylvania. And because investigations can take new directions, we are not closing this case. And Gavin Fish saw that as extremely positive because he was saying it has never been written down in any kind of public record, the words or the phrasing criminal homicide, and says no statute of limitations for criminal homicide. So do you see this as a potential positive?
I see it as kind of prosecutor speak. I mean, what they're saying is true. There's no statute of limitations. So if they do decide that this is a homicide 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, they can charge it as a homicide. So they're letting people know that there's not some sort of deadline that they're running up against, which is, I think, a little bit of a PR move. But at the same time, it's an announcement to say that they've got nothing, right? That the one thing that I would view as positive was they could say there is no evidence to support, but the way they phrased it to me was, we deal with beyond a reasonable doubt. When we file something, we have to arrive at beyond a reasonable doubt, and we don't have evidence to support that. And I'll tell you, the difference between no evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt is a huge divide. So they may have evidence, they may have suspicion, they may feel that they have suspects, they just don't have enough to bring charges.
But Josh, if you go in
court.
Yeah, but I mean, if you go in front of a jury of our peers, a panel of 12, and you say, and by the way, I didn't mention this, I'll give you this detail too, is that in the aftermath, within like 24 hours or maybe 48 hours, this Judge Schwartzman arrives at this condo. They bring in a professional cleaning service. I don't know if he did or the police, because they had classified it as an unaliving. I think it was the police. So they literally get a literal crime scene cleanup crew to come and professionally clean the home. And for some reason, they let the two Schwartzman, Camion and his dad, James, walk out of there with computers and cell phones, which then they asked them to bring back a couple of days later. But I mean, they had them for a few days. And why the hell would police let you walk out of a place where someone was just found dead with digital forensics? So it blows my mind. That is
actually even more troubling to me, because in those early days, especially, you would think, let's lock this all down. We don't know what's going to become important. This is obviously a situation that creates some questions. Let's lock it all down. We're not cleaning up anything. We're bringing in a forensic crew. We're seizing anything that could possibly be evidence. But you're right. Now that's all gone. Now they don't have any of that evidence.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Lee's comment. The Chester County DA may also be waiting until his buddy Shapiro's presidential run in 4 years, and there's a good chance this guy is going to run. And I'm really hoping that by then these documentaries, and these are big production companies working on them, so by then, this will be properly exposed to the media. And again, I don't want to minimize the job the media has done, because the Philadelphia Inquirer has done incredible work, but I don't get really worked up about stuff. And this, I don't know, it's just, I've gotten to know Josh and Sandy pretty well. And, I can just see the stress that it is put into their lives. And each year, instead of getting easier, it gets harder. And it's been 14 years. But Josh, I was going to ask you, like, if you go before a jury of your peers and you tell them all these things, they cleaned up the crime scene. She's found with blood running horizontally instead of vertically. I feel like there's enough circumstantial evidence here. So what is the burden here beyond a reasonable doubt? I know it's malleable, but I feel like they would have enough. They
Well,
clearly don't.
I mean, but there's two questions, right? Do they have enough to believe it's a homicide? And then who's responsible? Because you don't come out and say, I mean, maybe you make an announcement that we're reclassifying this as a homicide, but then next question is, okay, great, who did it? So maybe that's part of wrapped into their kind of ambiguous statement, is that we also don't have beyond a reasonable doubt a person to point a finger at. That
I can help him. I can help him with that.
Well, Jenny Allison says, has anybody looked at anybody else besides the fiance, or is fiance the suspect?
As far as I know, there was a headline like 2 weeks ago, maybe even less, that said like, suspicious person related to the Ellen Greenberg thing. And I was like, what is this? And I had never seen that surveillance video, but it was surveillance, surveillance video from within the condo, but it was the fiance. And I think the media outlet was like the Daily Mail or something. They had no idea what they were doing or talking about, but it was the fiance. And as far as I know, Jenny, who by the way is in my chat, and I love having her there. Shout out to Jenny Allison. But as far as I know, police have never looked at anyone, let alone another possible suspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could come down to that. As simple a question as this looks like a homicide. We have evidence that it's a homicide. We have a suspect, but we don't have enough to bring charges against that person. And maybe they're just keeping their powder dry until they can. I mean, they could be, maybe I'm hoping for too much, but they could be acting with discretion because they know who exactly they're looking at and they don't want to raise too much suspicion with that person. And maybe doing a press conference like this it might cause phone calls to start to be made. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but they, sometimes there's a clever like a fox mentality that they could take where they make sure that it's enough in the news, but not enough to scare somebody away from starting to make comments. I don't know.
Yeah. By the way, I saw that comment from Ida Shaw, which is a great comment. And I will ask Ellen's parents and Ida, if for some reason I forget, since I'm losing my memory, please remind me tomorrow. But there is a thing in the Jewish religion. You'll see this, God forbid, like when there's a terror attack in Israel, you'll see these guys come out in white suits. According to the Jewish religion, you have to literally collect every piece of human remains and bury them with that person. Not to get super morbid on your show, but I covered the collapse of the building here in Surfside, and a lot of the residents were Jewish, and they had, I forget the Hebrew name, but they had the people who do this. They brought all the rubble to this giant facility, and for literally like last couple of years, people have been sifting through it, and a lot of those people, they have not. This is morbid. They have not sealed their caskets yet because they're still collecting bits and pieces of human remains, DNA testing it, and then burying it with the body. So there could be something to this whole thing with the Jewish religion. I will ask. But Ida, please remind me if I forget.
Well, to kind of close this conversation out, I will say that 14 years later, they've got everything that they're going to get as far as forensically, as far as, I know that other experts have taken a look at the autopsies and arrived at their own conclusions. But I'm saying as far as like new evidence and development, I think that maybe this might be one of those cases that is, they know who's responsible. If they felt that this was a purely foreclosed, this was not in any way a homicide, I think they would have made that far more clear in this last press release that they made. They, to me, are intentionally being ambiguous as far as not putting a period at the end of the sentence when it comes to this case. And that just may be that they know exactly who they're looking at. And they're going to continue looking at that person till either they slip up or somebody's brave enough to come forward with information that they have.
Yeah, I always say the person I want to talk to most is this guy's wife. because a leopard does not change its spots. A couple real quick things too before we close this out, Josh, is you know, they have not filed civilly yet. They're really like amazing people, and they've they have been incredibly patient 14 years later. I don't know how people do this, but in a civil lawsuit, they could depose these people under
Sure.
oath, all of them, as you know. Also, early December, I think it's December 9th. I have to check the calendar. The Philadelphia Supreme Court, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Supreme Court is going to hear, and it's like such a specific thing, whether or not the and I'm not a lawyer, Josh, but it's something to the effect of whether or not the medical examiner has like complete high immunity. So it's whether or not there is discretion to have or ask the medical examiner, because right now I don't think they can ask to have him change the determination of the manner of death here from an unaliving to at least undetermined. So there's going to be a Supreme Court hearing just on that, and each thing is hopefully going to add up to something bigger.
Wow. Yeah. Again, it's one of those cases, and I saw people in the comments saying, I don't know anything about this, but like I said, you see this one image, and you immediately get it. You immediately get why this case is 14 years later still having people scratch their heads and get very frustrated about the whole thing. Joel, you got a show coming out tomorrow. What else do you got for us?
5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Surviving the Survivors, our YouTube channel, everywhere you listen to podcasts. And again, I'm going to have Josh and Sandy Greenberg and the former homicide prosecutor, Guy DeAndrea, who's super smart. He's actually he's one of the few people that's actually seen this file. And then Tom Brennan is a real character. I think in his early 80s, he's a former Pennsylvania state trooper, and he's a private investigator, and he's worked on this tirelessly, and he's super smart. And I think he's going to eventually get justice for this. And then if you want a lighter note, you want to be inspired, my mom's a child survivor. I've got a book out under the same title. It will change how you see life.
And it is a very good book. It's incredibly touching and also very, very funny. So check it out. And if you haven't already, though I can't imagine you're watching this channel and not a subscriber of Surviving the Survivor, but if you haven't, please go subscribe right now. Joel, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Always appreciate it.
Great to be here. Let's get Josh up in subs, man. We got to get him out of the law profession full time. So.
Please. Take care, my friend.
All right. See you.
Yeah, that case, it's one of those cases that there's so much stuff going on, and you're trying to keep track of all of the stuff that people are interested in, and you get kind of little glimpses here and there on different cases. And that case was one that I would like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. Oh yeah. And then you see that image, and then you hear about the history of it. And then you start to realize, wow, again, I've spent a large part of my career in law enforcement, and I'd like to believe in the integrity of the whole thing, but you see things like this and you really begin to wonder what's going on. But my sneaking suspicion is there's more going on behind the scenes than anybody really realizes. And I read that press conference as code for, hey buddy, suspect out there still walking around free. We haven't forgotten about you. We haven't closed this case. We're watching, and I've seen cold cases. 14 years old, by the way, is a baby as far as cold cases go. I've seen cold cases decades old where some clever detective gets involved and does something to bring it all up in the public sphere again. And that suspect starts making phone calls, starts making very bizarre trips out to warehouses in the middle of nowhere to retrieve items. Bizarre things start to take place, and it might just be enough to push a case like this over the edge. But who knows? All right. Kaylin, do we have our poll? Should we get the results of our poll? And I think we have a few more minutes to get into whatever everyone wanted to hear about last. I'm so grateful for Joel for coming on. Seriously, check out his channel. I can't imagine you guys don't already know about it, they do amazing work with the amount of guests that they have on every single night. One of their big pushes is that they have the best guests. They really do every single night. All right, Kouri Richins with 36%. Kouri Richins, the author, Kouri Richins, she was back in court, and she was back in court trying to get her bail, trying to get any bail, by the way, because the judge has denied her bail, and he did it again. And I actually have a problem with this one. Usually when you're talking about a murder case and people get denied bail, I'm not exactly losing sleep over the whole thing. But this case is a case where there is an argument for the defense. She has no criminal record. She has no crimes of violence in her past that I know of. I could be wrong. She has what we would call strong ties to the community. In other words, she's got a family there. She's got her children there. She's got a bunch of reasons that you wouldn't want to leave behind this country and flee to somewhere else. These are the arguments, and these are the things that you hear about during a bail hearing. The primary concerns during a bail hearing are threat to the community and a threat to flee, a flight risk. I don't think she falls especially high on the spectrum in either one of those. This crime is a murder, which makes it violent. But by its nature, it's not, we're not talking, multiple drive-by shootings here. We're talking about a case where they do have a defense. And we're talking about a person with no criminal record. And we're talking about a person with ties to the community. I am not trying to say that she's not guilty. I am not trying to say that she shouldn't, that they don't have a strong case against her and that she may not serve the rest of her life in prison. But when we're talking about bail, and again, granting bail doesn't even necessarily mean somebody gets out. It just means they have the opportunity to get out under sometimes tremendous conditions. But the judge here is just saying, I'm not even going to give you that opportunity. That bothers me. His answer, his reason for it, this is Judge Richard Mrazek said, there simply are not reasonably available means of mitigating her risk to the community and to herself, or the strong incentive for her to flee the jurisdiction of the court. It sounds a little like BS to me. There's no available means of mitigating that? There's no ankle monitor, supervision, house arrest, anything you could put her on? Her strong incentive to flee? I don't know. I feel like whenever you make a statement like that, I feel like that could apply to any murder. And if that's the way that it works in Utah, okay, fine. But it sounds like that statement could be applied to anybody ever accused of murder, that they are a threat to the community. We don't have a means of mitigating it, whatever that means. And they're going to flee because nobody wants to go to prison for the rest of their lives as a murderer. Again, that it bothered me. But a couple of other things happened that are perhaps even more significant as far as how this case is going to play out. First of all, the prosecution asked to have the drug charges. She was also charged with furnishing narcotics. It was all wrapped up in the idea of the fentanyl and how she procured it and her use of it in the sorry, I just saw Ada. I saw Ada yelling at me and I wanted to make sure that I read it. Josh, the judge did a great analysis on the reasons he denied. It was sound reasoning in your opinion. Well, then I'm gonna defer because I am for sure that you have a better grasp on what the reasons were for behind it with the judge. I just my initial response was, come on, give these people a shot. Anyhow, thank you for that, Ada. The prosecution asked to have these drug charges dismissed, and the defense is saying that's great for us. We've got charges dismissed. Sure. But I also think it's really good for the prosecution. You've got a murder case here. Handle a murder case. Quit it with these other distractions. Nobody cares about the tail wagging the dog with the drug offenses. Handle your murder case. Same thing happened with the mortgage fraud charges. They were severed from this case. Those are a little more serious, and so I can understand why the prosecution wouldn't want to just dismiss those outright, because those could land her in prison for some period of time too. But the severing of that is also worthwhile. Trim your case down. Take it from me, having experience in doing very messy and cumbersome cases. You're talking about murder. You're trying, no juror is going to sit through this and be asked, what kind of a case did you sit on? Oh, I sat on a mortgage fraud and drug possession case, and they were also charged with murder. It's a murder trial. Get rid of the noise, get rid of the nonsense, get down to the case itself. Now, the only interesting caveat that comes to the severing of the mortgage fraud is that I think that actually plays into the prosecution's theory on motive, is that money and her money problems may have played a role in why she wanted her husband dead and to perhaps collect some money. So that might be interesting to see how they're going to let that play out. And then finally, the judge denied the request for to separate the attempted murder and the murder. You remember that the evidence that we understand it as it is right now is that on one date, I believe it was Valentine's Day, she allegedly fed him a sandwich and he had these had this response to it. And then there's evidence that she may have said something along the lines of, I need some stronger stuff. And then she feeds him the Moscow Mule, which eventually takes his life. The defense was trying to be clever and say, well, these are separate crimes. You're going to muddy the waters, judge. You're going to confuse the jury, judge. You're going to harm, put our client on trial for their reputation rather than the crimes by adding these unrelated charges. And the judge saw right through that and said, no. These are part, and I wanted to get the judge's quote here. These are part of a common scheme or plan. And that's absolutely true too. It wasn't as though she attempted murder had zero to do with the murder, if all of this is to be believed. It was a failed attempt at the murder. It's all part of the murder. She failed one time, so she tried again. You don't get to split them off. So nice try by the defense, but no surprise that the judge denied that. And then finally, one other interesting thing that the judge said in this case, the defense threw in this kind of a Hail Mary request that there be 12 jurors on this case rather than 8. And in Utah, apparently in their jurisdiction, trials, even for murder, have 8 jurors, which to me, as a person being born, bred, and raised in a jurisdiction where you have 12, that bothers me. Bothers me from prosecution and defense perspective, to be quite honest with you. And it's not unheard of. I mean, we've seen this in Florida. They'll have 6 jurors when it's not a life case. In other jurisdictions, they handle it differently. But the judge made a very interesting comment here. He denied it, but then he said that we may be on the wrong side of history, but it is the law that he took an oath to uphold, and the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that a 12-person jury does not violate the Sixth Amendment. That, in other words, less than a 12-person jury does not violate the Sixth Amendment. And I thought that was interesting because the judge, rightfully so, according to the law, said, I'm not going to change anything in this case. You presented to me what I think is an interesting argument, and maybe an argument I agree on, but I'm not going to change things because you haven't presented to me law as to reason I'm going to do it. I'm not going to take it upon myself to start creating my own laws as I sit here right now. Here's the thing about these juries, and there's no magic number. I'm not saying 12 somehow makes it fair. I'm not saying we should have 16, and I'm not saying 10 makes it unfair. What I am saying is that when the less you get, the less jurors you have, 6 jurors, 8 jurors, you start to just statistically lessen your ability to have a wide range of perspectives. You lessen that ability to cast a wider net into the community. And is there a big difference between 8 and 12? I would argue there's a huge difference. In fact, it's 50% more. So it is a huge change in the perspectives that you would put back into that jury room by having 12 people. And I would think in a case of this kind of significance, that would be important. Utah says no. And that brings us to another point. I live, a lot of you watching, not all of you though, it's the United States of America, but each of those states is their own separate government, and they handle things sometimes, especially when it comes to the criminal law world, in dramatically different ways, in ways that might shock you. The difference between 8 and 12 jurors, yeah, that's big. But how about one jurisdiction, you kill somebody, you could be looking at the death penalty, and you drive 20 minutes across the border and they don't have that there. Those are huge, significant differences. Theories of liability. In California, they got rid of essentially the idea of felony murder, meaning everyone who's involved in the commission of a felony, not all felonies, but certain felonies, and a murder takes place, they're all held responsible. This is the getaway driver theory. Two people pull up to a liquor store robbery, armed liquor store robbery. One person's the getaway driver sitting in the car, and the guy goes inside and shoots the clerk. That getaway driver doesn't get to say, I don't think a murder was ever going to take place when you're involved in participating in an armed robbery. California said, we're done with that. Other states have that. So I know I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, but it does drive home the point that different jurisdictions, different states have entirely different ways of handling these things. And sometimes those can have incredibly significant effects on the outcome of a case. And who knows what effect it may have here on the Kouri Richins case. Anyhow, I talked a lot. We've heard a lot. You guys have all been fantastic. Oh, do we have questions on Kouri Richins? I don't want to skip ahead if we had questions on Kouri Richins. Aunt Nancy says, Josh, why did the original defense team resign in her defense? So I actually spoke to her attorney who is handling it. Why am I blanking on her name? If you guys remember her name, please put it in the comments. She's a fantastic lawyer. And I asked her about that. And her reason to me was that they had previously represented her in an unrelated civil issue. Sky Lazaro, yes, thank you. Thank you, Kaylin. That she had previously represented her in an unrelated civil type matter, and that they felt that that created a conflict for her case in the criminal matter. Now, I love Sky, and I'm not doubting Sky, but it sounded like a slightly politically massaged statement to me. To me, that's a conflict that you could probably get around if you really wanted to. But I don't think the clear answer on it has ever come forward. I think it may have done a little bit with that, and that might have been the ultimate excuse, but it might have been conflicts of personality or conflicts of strategy. In whatever reason, Sky's no longer on the case. She's a phenomenal lawyer, and don't take anything I'm saying as to try to call that into question. But she's got new lawyers now, and they're doing a bang up job too. Any other questions on this one? Kaylin's giving me that, no, I don't got nothing for you look. Okay. All right, guys. So what did you miss last week? On Monday, we had Vinny Politan of Court TV was on our Courtroom Confidential Conversations series. Really getting a lot of great feedback from people on this new series that we're trying. It was something new, something we felt like there was a space for on YouTube. We didn't see a lot of people talking to other creators about their backstories. I know some of these people, and I think they all have fascinating backstories. We did an interview with Joel. We did an interview with Vinny. That came out last Monday. We did an interview with Gisela from Grizzly True Crime. All of them have been really fascinating. All of them are fascinating people on their own, and it's just kind of interesting to hear where they came from and how they arrived at this crazy world of YouTube and true crime. So you missed that on Monday, but have no fear, because we have another episode coming out on Monday in that conversation series, and that will be with Gigi McKelvey of Pretty Lies and Alibis. Also an incredible person. She has an incredible backstory as well. Stuff that I didn't even know. I've known her for a long time, but talking about being a surgical nurse down in Haiti, we got into all of that. She's fascinating, got some really great stories. So, and she also has a really wonderful YouTube channel and community that she has built. So I hope that you guys enjoy that. That will be out premiering this Monday. We do them as premieres because we really want to encourage you guys to be with us in the chat. So we premiere it this coming Monday, the 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Come join us. We always chat about, some of the crazy stuff that comes out in those interviews. We have our normal Courtroom Confidential episode out this Friday, catching us up on everything that's taken place this week. And then we have a members only live coming out on Saturday. So for you guys who have been gracious enough to join us as members, please join us this Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific. What is that? 10, 11, 12. Is that 12 p.m. Eastern? And I will take some suggestions, but then I also have some wacky stories to tell you guys, because that seems like the stuff that you guys want to hear. I thought of one today. It was one of the more memorable experiences I had when I first became a defense attorney. And I will say it involves a potential prison break, if that's a good enough of a teaser. So love you all for being here. Thank you all for sticking around. If you want to hear from somebody else on these conversation series, please let us know. We'd love to hear your suggestions. We're trying to reach out to everyone. By the way, if there's somebody you want to hear from, let them know too, because we've been bugging some of these people and they're very busy and we can't get them to respond to us. So harass them. If you're fans of their channel, let them know we want to interview them. And we're still working on more. Oh, thank you so much, K9 Catherine. Yes, it is my birthday tomorrow. So thank you for that. It's also Tiffany's birthday tomorrow. So happy birthday to her too. Yes, we're married and we share the same birthday, years apart, but same day on the calendar. Interesting little factoid there. But what I was saying is we still have case notes and 5 things that we're working on, and tell us cases that you guys are interested in. Want to hear your thoughts. You're all fantastic. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys again next week. Take care, everybody.